Hello, everybody! Welcome
Howdy.
to another episode of Dungeon Masters Guild Community Jam. If this is your first time tuning in, the Jam is a nice casual discussion that I, brand manager Lysa Penrose, get to have with some of our amazing creators on subjects they love. This Jam is all about the Feywild, and we're getting hype for D&D Live, which is starting right after this show. So this is a great pregame, shall we say. But enough about me. Let's meet our creators. Jacky, briefly introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Jacky. You can find me on Twitter at Death by Mage. That's what I'm usually referred to as. And I am a best-selling DMsGuild writer, and I also write my own indie games, and I'm also the lead creative manager for Unbreakable Publishers.
Yay! Love that series. And we also have Ned. Ned, introduce yourself.
Howdy, I'm Ned. I have been doing this stuff for about 4 years or so, 3 or 4 years. Um, I've got a few best-selling stuff on there. I've got let's say a couple metal stuff, and I am trying to get into doing this professionally.
Very cool. Definitely something a lot of creators over on the guild aspire to and accomplish. So that's a great goal. So we're going to talk about the Feywild today, but we're going to ease into it a little bit with some discussions about your work in general. So tell me about what led to your being a designer for Dungeon Masters Guild. And we can either do like hand raising or I can call on somebody.
Jacky, go ahead, go
Yeah.
first. I'm more than happy to let you go.
Jacky.
Sure. So back in the days when I was a little bitty creator, I used to be a blogger first, but I actually used to do a lot of homebrewing for a lot of my RPG games, especially D&D. So I had a lot of experience homebrewing things, and when the guild first came around, I kind of waited a little bit because I actually didn't know what it was, and I didn't know how I could contribute to it yet. And thankfully, as time went on, a lot of other creators provided tools like templates, guides, and kind of talking about like how to market. And then I kind of just jumped in straight in. I just said, all right, we're just gonna give it a go and see what happens.
Excellent. What about you, Ned?
I found out about the guild about a year or so after I really started getting into D&D. I always loved the idea of D&D as a kid. I remember learning about Jublex being the god of slime back when I was in
Ooh.
like middle school or something, and I was like, a god of
My most
slime? I
used
love
demon
slime.
lord. My most used demon lord of all of them.
Okay, I have plans for Jublex, so you and I are gonna have to talk more about that because I'm writing a ooze supplement, but that's for later.
Yes, supplements
Um,
of ooze.
it's gonna go with my fungus supplement.
Excellent.
But then I discovered that I was able to publish this stuff, and I was like, hey, that's awesome. And I wound up putting together a spreadsheet that let me like calculate monster CRs super easily. Uh,
Nice.
so so then I was able to start just churning out monsters, and that's basically been my whole business model. Just churn out as many monsters as I can until I just say, okay, this thing is full enough. Let's put it out there. And now that I've actually got some money coming in from those, I can use that money to buy art for my new supplements. So
Oh,
it
that
just builds on itself.
yeah. So when I was like, I want to do a community jam about the Feywild, I immediately thought of the two of you because you've got some Feywild titles out there. So tell me a little bit about those. I know we did it a bit backstage, but for the people.
Yeah.
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 I can go first. My very first supplement on the guild was actually a Feywild title. It's Journey into the Feywild. It's my very first title I ever produced. I commissioned a very good artist friend of mine to work on the cover, so if anyone who's seen it or bought it over the years, thank you, because my friend, the artist Journeyman, is really wonderful. But yeah, that was my very first supplement, because at that time there wasn't a whole lot of stuff for the Feywild yet. So I wanted something for a supplement, and I said, all right, I'll write one and see how it goes. And very recently, I Through the Veil, Treasury of the Fae just came out on the DMs Guild, and I contributed a couple of magic items into that series. So that was really nice for me to work into something that was Feywild related again.
Whenever folks want to or ask me for advice on their first thing that they're writing for Dungeon Masters Guild, I usually tell them, well, manage your scope. Start with like
Hmm.
like an encounter or something. I feel like you were
Don't
like,
do me.
no way.
Yeah, I'm definitely the outlier. I definitely did not heed caution. I kind of just said, I'm just gonna write a supplement, and I'm just gonna also invest a significant amount of money into art, and just go with it.
Yeah, there's tons of it's basically like a guide to if you want to run a campaign in the
Mhm.
Feywild, this has like everything you need in it.
It gives you advice, actually. That was the one thing I wanted to do. Like, and I think we'll probably touch on those later, but like it gave a lot of advice about like how to approach the Feywild, because
It's
I
hard.
over the years I kind of realized the interpretation of the Feywild is different, and I went, everyone should approach it differently. And so here's some advice, here's some tips, and kind of just to help you. And I also curated a lot of artwork to help get you started into thinking about the Feywild. And so it's more like a get started jumps, like a little quick start, if anything. That's really what it is, because it's not so long as like other supplements. It's just meant to be more like, this is a quick start. I want you to think about how you want to approach it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Ned, you have quite a few Feywild titles. Tell us a
A
little bit
couple.
about those.
Before I go any further, I just heard some thunder, so there's a possibility that I might lose power.
Okay.
If I have an
Fingers
uninterrupted power
crossed.
source connected to both this and my internet browser, so if I do lose power, I should at least have enough time to let y'all know. But just be aware of that.
Okay.
So my first couple supplements that I released were, I think my first actual monster supplement was a thing about like the Mechanus and Limbo. So like Modrons and Slot, because they also didn't get enough love. That's kind of my whole like operandus. The word, my whole operating philosophy is, if people don't pay attention to it, that's what I want.
Mhm.
I'm going to do this out of spite and contrarianism. I'm going to write stuff about the Slot even though no one seems to care. And that's basically the thing that really got me into the Feywild. Um, the main thing that I've been doing is monster supplements. So there's a huge gap for Fey creatures that are above a challenge rating of really 7. Like, in all official supplements as of right now, there are like there's only the Eladrin for CR10, there's Trostani for CR19, and then nothing.
Hmm.
Arguably, there's the Explorer's Guide to Wildemont, but the Sea Fury is a very specific example. It's a very story-specific sort of thing, not really applicable in a broader sense. And so my approach was, why don't we fix that? And that's where the Lords and Ladies supplement came in. It provides people with stats for like high-level Fey things, like things in the CR10 to like 25 range. So
Terrifying.
yep. So it has like Titania, the Queen of Air and Darkness, the Prince of Frost. I've done updates to all these stats since then, since I've gotten better ideas as moving forward. And then I later added to that with the She. Did y'all play third edition?
I
Mm-mm.
did. I did.
Okay. You remember the Celestial Eladrin from third edition?
Yes, I
Yeah.
do. I
The
do.
chaotic. So for those of you that aren't familiar, in third edition, actually second edition, the Eladrin originally
Yeah.
introduced as the celestial equivalent of demons. They were the chaotic good outsiders to fill in that gap. Then that continued that trend in third edition, but then in fourth edition they reappropriated the name Eladrin for a subrace of elves to replace the high elves. But then they went back to how they had originally for fifth edition with high elves and wood elves, but then kept Eladrin as a subrace of elf. So now like there's an entire race of like things that are very faith themed floating around that haven't really been used. And I figured, why don't we use them? So then I turned those into the sort of like demon slash devil slash angel equivalent for the Feywild, the She. So like you have like the Tulani, you have the
Mhm.
Verdant Prince from fifth edition from Monster Manual 5, but I rebranded it as the Verdani so that it can be male or female because we're not locking things into gender here.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
did the Frostwind Virago switch that name to the Virage because again, not locking things in a gender, and also Virago has a very long history of being used as a method for diminishing women, and we're
Mhm.
not about that here. Um, it's it's basically just another word for the B word. So then,
Great.
yeah. D&D has had some issues in the past where I love that we're moving forward from that. But yeah, basically all the stuff that I've been doing is monster stat blocks, things for people to be able to encounter that are Fey themed, but that are more like that don't require them to just use stat blocks they've already seen, that give them interesting stuff. And now I'm trying to turn it into a whole like expanded explanation of here's how you handle these sorts of adventures in the Feywild. I've got a lot of stuff planned. I'm going a little bit crazy because I have like 5 projects going on at any given time, but I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you want some creatures for your Feywild campaign, basically Ned and his fellow creators of the Wild Court, I believe you call yourselves, have you covered. So
yeah, we have 100% covered. We actually were the ones who got tweeted by Wizards of the Coast a few weeks back, and there was another Lysa that helped with that. Am I right?
That was me.
Okay, that was you. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. I wasn't sure if it was like if it was a different Lysa with like yeah. Thank you again so much for that, Lysa. It was an enormous help. I was literally freaking. I actually hurt my hand because I was clapping my hands so much in excitement.
Oh no. Well, sorry, not sorry.
No, it's beautiful. I loved it. I put on a band-aid and everything.
All right, so now we're getting to the meat of these Feywild questions. So both of you clearly love this setting. So I'm wondering, what is it about the Feywild? Why is it so alluring for you? And Jacky, I guess we'll start with you again.
Yeah, sure. I think the one thing I love about the Feywild, the reason why I always love coming back to it, it's because, one, it's largely unexplored. Two, it is whatever you make of it. Because if you think about how the Fey are, they kind of just make everything as they go, and that's the wonderful thing about the Feywild. It can be as fantastical as you want it to be. It could be, and it has all, and it can fit any kind of genre you want, because you can throw in any genre you want to it, and it can still be applicable. Because if you go back to like old school science fiction, it still applies. If you try to apply gothic horror, it still applies. If you try to apply it, it leans into itself, and because it's so malleable, you can fit into any kind of story that you need. And it's always wonderful because it's that mixture of, because the Feywild as a whole is that mixture of familiarity, but also otherworldly. So you get so it creates that nice little tension. Everyone's not sure where they are, and it always leaves everybody just wondering more about it. Yeah. So that's why I love it.
I feel like that combination of familiar and otherworldly has that sort of like uncanny feeling to it, which is always an interesting place to be emotionally. What about you, Ned? Why do you love the Feywild?
Everything that Jacky just said and that you just said, like it has every kind of potential. I actually gathered some books here to make myself look smart, but also because like I wanted to give examples of like the different kinds of stories you can tell by using examples that people are going to like try to go for. Like I have the Chronicles of Narnia. You could have like a whimsical fairy like story, a kid story. You could have something more like high-minded. Like if you want to have like an encounter with like the elves of Lothlorien, you can base stuff off of Lord of the Rings. If you want something that's just completely bananas, you can go for Alice in Wonderland or anything from Lewis Carroll. Like if you could take inspiration from basically anything. I've got like children's books here. A Neil Gaiman one, by the way. Neil Gaiman has played a large role in this, as you might imagine. Like there's just so much that can be done with the Fae. Also, as a queer person, the Fae have an otherness to them, which innately appeals to the every aspect of our community. Like everything, especially when you get to like the bad Fae, like hags, goblins, that sort of stuff. Those things have a very powerful appeal to folks in the LGBT community, people that are part of other sort of social minorities, people that suffer from like from chronic illness. I've got a friend who has MS who loves fairy stuff. Like the otherness has such a powerful message that it can bring to people. Why not use that? Why not give people the opportunity to take harness of that and to make that into their own stories? Like that's the real excitement of D&D, is that you get to help people make their own stories. And also, like I said, out of contrarianism, no one else was doing Feywild stuff. I was gonna do Feywild stuff.
Mm-hmm. Let's dig into that a little bit. What you brought up about the otherness and how it appeals, especially to all sorts of marginalized groups.
Mhm.
What do you think it is specifically about Fae or particular types of Fae that have that appeal?
Well, if I may,
Mhm. Yeah, please.
so the main thing, the best place to start with it that I think is hags.
Mm-hmm.
Hags are basically the third big supplement that I put out there, my hag compendium. Um, and there's something about hags and witches as a whole, but especially hags, that appeals to basically every aspect of the LGBT community. And you look at queer coding in villains and
Mm-hmm.
like Disney and basically everything else. And queer coding is hugely prevalent. I mean, Ursula was straight up based off of and created by queer people. Like we love hags and witches.
Mm-hmm.
A few years back, I worked at a gay bar, and the like on Halloween, people will come up in these enormously elaborate witch costumes, like the full green face, big,
Yeah.
dress,
Mm-hmm.
all that all that stuff. And so like the fact that they don't play by other people's rules,
Mm-hmm.
like hags and then everything else, goblins, fairies, elves, all that stuff, all that has a very powerful sense of kinship with like the LGBT because we don't play by the rules that are expected by us. And the same thing goes for racial minorities, people that don't play by the rules of this particular society that we're in. um, all of that has it resonates so deeply with us that we look at it and say, that's me right there. I'm
Mm-hmm.
that guy.
Yeah. Jacky, do you have any thoughts to add to that?
I think I definitely want to add to the thought about also a lot of like Fae and Feywild themes always also have this element of like it for that otherness, right? Where people want to escape. It's that sense of escapism. So it's like it adds to it as well because a lot of the times, a lot of those stories, a lot of those stories and themes are always about traveling or go or just walk or just taking like a simple left turn and somehow you're somewhere else, and so it's all about like that sense of like there's that it's a parallel but it's different, and there's
It's a
that sense of
reflection.
it's a reflection, but they want to, and it's something that's also a lot of the other face stories usually involve like because it is a reflection. You're looking at yourself. You get to see yourself. You get to be introspective. You get to look into yourself and see what you really who you really are, what you really want, and things like that. And so it allows you to think deeply about who you are inside, as well as exploring other themes and concepts. Because if you look at a lot of stories that involve the Fae, a lot of the times the protagonist character will always be doing something that they normally wouldn't do, and then over time they'll realize whether how those actions impact them and whether it's something that really is truly who they want to be versus who they think they wanted to be.
and
Yeah.
and to add on to that, that intrinsically comes with an element of transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And transformation is something that appeals to all people because we all change over the course of our lives, but it especially has a powerful message to the trans community because they are literally engaging in the holy alchemy of creating themselves. A story about like the stories about transformation of a man getting turned into a frog until he learns a lesson, of a person transforming into a tree to escape somebody and to find a new life. Like those are all things that happened in actual mythology, and they again resonate really strongly with us. So like Jacky said, you confront yourself, you learn about yourself, and then you transform into yourself. Or
Yeah.
if you do it wrong, you transform away from yourself, and that there's a tragedy there.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like first of all, I love this conversation so much.
I
But
want this conversation to go on forever.
yeah, I love, Ned, that you brought up the phrase that the Fae don't play by the rules. I feel like that captures them really well. And I
Mm-hmm.
think what is appealing about that is they don't play by the rules. They completely own that. and they are powerful for it in some way, either beloved or deeply feared, or but just powerful. And then Jacky, I love thinking of the Feywild as a sort of funhouse mirror of the world. I think that becomes really powerful, and also that it's a funhouse mirror of the world, so everything is other in some way, and that's fully accepted because that's just the way the wilds are. I feel like this conversation is transitioning really nicely into my next question, which is, what are themes of Feywild content and stories? I know we said that the Feywild could really work for any type of genre that you want, but are there particular types of themes that work really well?
I think Ned has
Yeah,
some already written.
I think you have notes.
Ned has already notes.
So, like we already said earlier, you could basically tell any kind of story that you want, but there are definitely certain kinds of stories that resonate particularly strongly with fairy tale stuff. So there's, things that are very, kid style. Journey into another world. I'm not going to say isekai, even though I just did, because it's definitely not an isekai, but it's, journeying into a place that is a reflection of your own world. Chronicles of Narnia, The Wizard of Oz, those sorts of things. You could tell a story like that. But if you look at old fairy lore, so this gets into the definition of what is a fairy, which is its own discussion in of itself, because mythologically speaking, there's no such thing as fairies. The term fairy it really encompasses a very broad sort of net of mythological ideas of everything from old divinity, like the Alshi, or the Fomorians and the actual Irish Fomorians, the ghost stories. If you look at if you've read through William Butler Yeats's mythologies, a lot, half of these stories are just ghost stories. One literally involves a person getting followed home by a dark figure in the middle of the night. That could be a ghost story, that could be a devil story, that could be a fairy story. They're all the same kind of stories. The Wild Hunt is alternately said to be populated by devils, by ghosts, by celestials, like angels, by King Arthur. Fairies are basically everything. So you could have ghost stories. You could have, fairies could be nature spirits. They could be, stories about the old ways. See what else do I have there? Fallen divinity. Fairies could even just be narrative personifications. This fairy represents this aspect. People keep on wanting to introduce the Tarot Greater Arcanum into the Feywild. I tried to find my tarot deck, but I couldn't find it. But I've also got the Alleyman's tarot deck coming, which is going to be very exciting. It's have you heard of that?
No, but it sounds really nice.
I'll send you a link to it because it's a limited time buy. It's literally just a tarot deck with expansion packs, and it's it's going to be fun.
Interesting.
But every single person in the Feywild could be made to represent a specific archetype, and then you just let the players see how they interact with those archetypes, transform them, do whatever they want with them. There's so many themes that can be done with the Feywild, but ultimately the biggest theme is the esoteric. Like Jacky said, you don't really know what's going on. It creates more mystery. It draws you in deeper. That's kind of the thing that really keeps people in the Feywild is, I have to learn more. I have to learn more. What is going to happen next? So you could even reappropriate the mechanic that makes people never want to leave the Feywild by saying that's why they don't want to leave the Feywild. They want to know more. And also surrealism.
Surrealism's a good one.
Yeah, that's a
Surrealism is a good one. That's always the fun one, because you can go a little wild and you can just you can just come up with anything and it's fine. It sticks. It's because you make it true. I love that, especially when you think about other cartoon series or things like that, or even some book stories where it's even for example, the most iconic one, Alice in Wonderland, has a lot of surrealism. It's just, you're just okay, there's a bunch of talking insects. There's the Queen of Hearts with their card soldiers. You're just yeah, okay, that's a thing. Okay, fine.
You just accept it. She's got to have card soldiers. Why wouldn't she? Come on.
One of my other favorite ones I will use as a draw for is also, one of my favorite type of content for Feywild is definitely things like mysteries. So going into another world and exploring the mystery behind it and trying to like unravel like why the thing is the way it is kind of always one of my favorite ones. I love and I love the ones that are like dark reflections. So it's like when you go into like, that's why I love doing the Fey dark stuff sometimes, because it's like it's a dark reflection. And
Jacky, we have to talk about the Fey dark stuff at some point, because I got ideas I want to share with you.
Yes. So I love doing dark reflections because it's always nice to see it, because it's that nice little element of like turning the tables of like when I was talking about the introspection. Well, now you get to look at the darker reflection. You get to look at the other side of things and look at what kind of like darker attributes can be put up and how they're raised and elevated. Even when you think about like elements of sci-fi, where when they talk about like parallel universes, you can still attribute that to a Feywild setting. You can still make it work for a Feywild setting.
I actually wrote aliens down. Yeah.
So and that's the other, and the thing is like there is a lot of room you can play with that, but those are the kind of contents and stories I always like to think about. And also I will touch back a little bit on like demons, because like in a lot of like Eastern Asian cultures, like especially like China and Japan and a little bit of Korea, a lot of demons are more like Fae, because they're attributes of reality. So like when you think about like, for example, like the Japanese yokai, you're thinking about like the fact that some yokai, they literally are personifications of a specific idea or a concept. They're not nature spirit. They're not specifically nature spirits. They're not specifically an object either. They're just a concept. They may manifest.
I'm sandals.
Yes, exactly. Actually, there's like demons that are inspired. There's a demon, for example, that's like, it's all about literally a demon that's a troublemaker that runs away and always is invisible, and that's all they are. They just cause mischief and they're invisible, and it's just that's
or the
that's
one
their
that just wants tofu.
Right. One of them embodies natto beans, for example. So it's like
or that washerwoman who's always washing beans.
Yeah, exactly. So there's always a lot of, and that was one of the things when I was going back to researching my own culture and looking back at a lot of like the stories, like the mixtures of ghost stories and everything else, and it's just like you realize like Fae as a term is very loosely broad, but at its core concept, like if you look at every kind of story you ever thought about that's folklore, ghost stories, anything that happens in the world, you can almost attribute it to being a Fae story, because of the fact that it's all about that sense of, okay, something it's that breaking of it's that kind of the breaking of reality. That's what it is. It's that realization that the world you thought is not what you thought, and there's more to it. And so I think that's also that adds back to that allure, that mystery, because again, as we stated, it's like you want to know more. You want to figure out what is there, and it's that nice little rabbit hole that you kind of just dig yourself through every time. And also, like, because I know Ned's a New Gaiman fan, I think back to Coraline, which is one of my favorite ones. It's like that. It's just
so
it has a built-in mystery, and it has a built-in mystery. And as you dig deeper, you start seeing all you start seeing the tendrils of all the horror that is to be. And that is kind of what I like as a person for Feywild stories. It's just like there's more to it, and you're kind of just going, oh, this is a lot different than I thought it was going to be.
It sounds like we're both horror fans too.
Yes, I'm a big horror fan, so I always throw in horror into my Feywild stories.
I'm actually working on a way to introduce like Hellbound Heart style horror to the Feywild in the Feydark, and I really want to talk to you about that, because that's going to be fun.
Yes.
So I feel like the question of what exactly makes a creature Fey has come up. So which is my next question, but I want to pause here for a moment. For folks who are listening, if you have questions for Jacky and Ned, totally put those in the chat. Put question in all caps so it's easy for me to see, and we will do those at the end of my little list of questions here, or insert them if they make sense then. Okay, so let's talk about Feywild creatures. What do you think? Well, let's start with the simple question of what makes something a Fey specifically, because you talked about how different creatures can kind of be Fey, and it sounds really nuanced.
If I may, I think that Jacky really hit the nail on the head there with with his comparison to yokai, or his allusion to yokai, in that there's a yokai for a very specific behavior for basically everything. There's like there's yokai that just do one specific thing and then that is their whole life. Ultimately, you could really expand that to all Fae, which is that every Fae represents a concept. Maybe a narrative concept, maybe a more abstract concept, maybe a naturalist concept. But like, as long as it relates to something, like is it represents something, or is born from something, or contributes to something, or plays a role in something, that's what really makes it a Fae, and that is intrinsically linked to its aesthetic. Like, because Jacky, you mentioned that you included like illustrations to represent different like ways of telling a story. That is key. Like, including those sorts of illustrations really is key, because once you know like what kind of aesthetic you're working with, that then informs every other aspect of what you're going to be doing with the Fae. So the Fae has to have some kind of aesthetic, some sort of aesthetic that defines it, because the aesthetic and the story being told are one and the same.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I can use an example, like, so because most people who've experienced the Fae or looked at the Fae or Feywild in general, usually they think, okay, it involves nature or something like that. I'm like, yes, but not necessarily. But an example I can give is think about a workshop, think about like a metalsmith's workshop, and the players enter in, the doors open, and there's just gears upon cogs everywhere. Everything's clockwork and oriented, because I'm thinking back to Modrons, and it's just like you're just thinking, and you just see all these little gadgets and tools walking around and coming alive, and you have this. But then you realize you're tiny, and there's this large, overbearing artificer just toiling away, and that is still kind of very Fae-like. That is still very. I think the most important thing when you're trying to define what you want as Fae, think about what are the things you're looking for. So it's like, so there are some elements that are both aesthetic, but there's also elements about, okay, I think the core element is always going to be that feeling of otherworldliness. I think that's the core quality, because that also is part of the Collins dictionary definition of Fae, which is it's otherworldly. So like, that is one of the things that I think contributes a lot to the identity of Fae, is that it needs to have this sense of otherworldliness.
I definitely agree
still,
there.
you can still get away with it, like when you travel to, like, say, the Nine Hells, but it's not. But it's different, because when you think about how the aesthetic of the Nine Hells are done, it's not just otherworldly; it's also grim, dark, brutal, and so there's a lot of horrific. There's a lot of connotations attached to it. So it's like, so you have to think about, when you're looking at the Feywild and the Fae, you're thinking, okay, what are the things you're looking for? What are the contexts you're looking for? So you're always thinking, like, otherworldly. There's more to it than what it seems. It's mysterious, and you think about, like, how thinking about, like, there's light and shadow. There's always a representation of light and shadow. There's a duality in the Feywild a lot of the times, where they'll cover light and shadow and the things in between, like what lies in between, or the things that lie between both of them.
And like, you can even see that in, like, within the two main arc Fae, like Titania. She's beautiful, she's fair, she's glorious, she's good, but she will also flay you alive if you make one single error in her court. Like, she is not good, she just has that within her, but she also has all the fury and terror of the sword, of summer and the sun, and the unforgiving nature of heat stroke, and, like, Polonitsa. Like, all of these things are inside of her. And then you have, like, the Queen of Air and Darkness. Yes, she's terrifying, she's mysterious, she's unknown, she's dark, but there's going to be more to her than that. We don't really know what else there is to her, because in her original incarnation in D&D, she was explicitly a corrupted Fae god that lived in Pandemonium. So she's only ever been given really evil connotations. What other connotations could be found with her? That's something that a DM can explore. Like, maybe there's a gentler side to the Queen of Air and Darkness. Maybe there's the side of that comforts the insects that live beneath the stones. Maybe there's a side that listens to people and brings vengeance to them. We don't know. There's so many different aspects to what could make her that tie into that whole duality thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is Fey creatures have an aspect of, Jacky, you said otherworldliness, surrealism, but also layers and mystery. And Ned, you highlighted that they tend to be very conceptual, that they become symbols of these different concepts, especially. So I think
Like, if I may just interrupt
yeah,
for just 1
please.
second, you have both seen Pan's Labyrinth, I assume.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, the Pale Man.
Yeah,
A
the Pale Man.
very explicitly a wonderfully well done allegory of greed and desire without need. And like you notice, there is a reason why there's a reason why his hands had their eyes in them, because he can only see what he reaches for.
Mm-hmm.
He only ever responds if someone takes what is his. He doesn't care for anything else anywhere else. There's a pile of children's shoes next to the entrance to his chamber. That in itself is terrifying. Like, all of these things just contribute to the metaphor. He's not a twinkly little fairy, but he is still very fey. I actually made an adaptation to him that I'm going to be including in one of my my supplements. That's based partially off of the Tonome. Are you familiar with?
Ah.
Yeah, the Tonome, but I'm naming it the Tonomich, and I'm doing that for political reasons.
Oh, okay, I'm just gonna pretend I didn't.
I might change that name a little bit. I might change it just a little bit.
So I feel like we're honing in on what makes a fae. I'm gonna follow it up with a couple questions to get even closer for folks who are aspiring to design their own Feywild creatures. So the first is, what makes a compelling fae specifically? So we've talked about what makes a fae in general, but what makes one particularly compelling?
How the players
Ooh.
have to address it. Like,
Ooh, what
what
do you mean
it
by that?
what does it force the players to confront? Do they like what
Mm-hmm.
kind of challenge does it present them with? Does it present them with a challenge of deception? So I'm going to use, for example, one of my a monster that I've been thinking of for. Actually, hang on, let me pull up the notes that I have on that particular monster. So the Gloaming Court is the court of the Queen of Air and Darkness, and
Mm-hmm.
whenever I write stuff for that, the way I always characterize it is it needs to be. You never need to, you should always not know exactly where you stand with the Gloaming Court, especially the Gloaming Court, because the Gloaming Court is all about deceptions upon deceptions upon deceptions. So one of my envoys for the Gloaming Court is a character called Alfhilda, and she is a elf or a ladra. I haven't decided exactly what kind of elf she is, but she is an elf that is always accompanied by a displacer beast that is clearly her bodyguard. It's always nearby, and it's always pacing around. It's never far from her, and so the assumption is, okay, so here's Alfhilda. She's definitely going to try to mislead you. Be on your guard with her. In actuality, it is Ragna, that displacer beast, that is the one in control of the situation of the encounter. And so Ragna communicates with Alfhilda telepathically and can cast Mislead at will, which is an extension of its displacement ability. So in that way, you get something that forces the players to realize, okay, who's really in control of this interaction? Where is this interaction going? It forces the players to think about, like, how do we deal with what we're encountering here? Ultimately, it's what makes a Fae compelling is the thing that makes any monster compelling. What does it force the players to do?
I could extend that into not just what the
Please.
players need to do, but also what they need to look inward for. Because like I'm really big about like a lot of the inward thought processes when it comes to exploring the Feywild. So like a lot of the time, if you think about like a lot of fairy tales or things like that, like even if you think about like Alice in Wonderland and Look Into the Looking Glass, every fantastical character that's introduced in that story has something that makes Alice confront. And but it's not like physical. Some of it's physical, but a lot of it is also internal. And it's thinking about like what is, and that's a reflection of, and because of the fact that Wonderland's a reflection of Alice's experiences in the real world. But when you think about it, you think about, okay, what besides just being a physical obstacle, what else can this Fae bring to the table? And so it's like, so you can and you think about like, okay, there could be fate, and so when you think about like even just the 3 pillars of adventure for D&D adventures, it's like you got combat, which is always there, but you can look at how does the social aspect handle, how is the social aspect going to be handled, how is the exploration part going to be handled, because you could have a fate that is just a guardian or a warden of a region or a place, and it's now and it created this obstacle that you must overcome, or it could also just be like, because even getting lost is an obstacle in of itself. So you can
And I have
have
faith for that.
Yeah. So that is going to happen, and you can have an element where it's like the Fey that you're experiencing is actually the mists in the Feywild. That is a Fey itself, and its entire purpose is to make people get lost. Well, why it's making you get lost, and then you kind of have to think about like literally piercing the veil, and that sort of thing. And so you want every monster, even when you're adventure writing, should always have a reason behind it, and should be intentional. And so when you're thinking about that, and thinking about how the Fae are going to be put in, what is their intended purpose? What are they here for? What are they trying to invoke in your character, in these characters? And it could, and when you're doing a social element, okay, it could be as innocuous as trying to help 2 Fae settle an argument. Well, why is that important? Because it relates to something that will come later down in your adventure, but it has this whole element of like, you have to understand, and it brings in those nuances. Like, you want to look into those things. You want to have the characters think about, why is this important? How does this resolve what is going on with everything we're doing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love the call out to Alice in Wonderland in particular, because I mean, what a classic example of how people tend to visualize the Feywild. But you're really, like, when you break down that story, it is 100% about Alice figuring out who she is.
Mm-hmm.
She's asked so many times, "Who are you?" and needs to figure out an answer. So I love that as an example to illustrate your particular point there. So
Also, if I
yes,
may
yes.
interject one thing, um, do you know why the caterpillar asks her that question so many times?
No, why?
It was apparently, this is what I've heard, I don't know 100%, but apparently that was the traditional greeting in an opium den. Who ah
What?
ooh.
Oh,
Ah,
Yeah.
interesting. All right,
Yeah,
that
I
that
don't
actually
know
adds
makes
if
an
it's
sense now.
true.
extra layer. That
I don't know
fits
if
for
it's
the
true.
caterpillar.
Yeah, but
Mm-hmm.
like I love weird little bits of
Mhm.
information like that.
So we've kind of talked about, like, just conceptually what makes a fae, and we've talked about sort of bonus points if you want to not just make a fae but make one really really cool. Oh, I thought of another thing I was thinking when Jacky was explaining his thoughts. I feel like it's probably not true of every player in Dungeons and Dragons, but I think for many, the most interesting part of playing D&D is exploring your character, especially in a longer term campaign. So anytime a creature can sort of reflect back at a character or help them delve deeper into who that character is, I feel like is compelling, because the players become very interested in that, because ultimately it's about them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's cool. So yeah, so bonus points if you make a fae that's particularly compelling. Let's really speak as like nitty gritty mechanics designers, though.
Okay.
What are requirements for something being a fey creature in Dungeons and Dragons?
Magic.
Right.
Like it's
Some
gotta
kind of
have magic.
magic. I think, but I will add to that. They don't necessarily have to have the Fey creature type.
Oh,
Agreed,
interesting.
agreed.
Okay.
Because displacer beasts, they're not fey. Unicorns, they're not fey.
Mm-hmm.
Like like night hags, they're not
They're
fey.
not Fey.
Banshees, they're not fey. But all of those are intrinsically part of the Feywild. Um, Honestly, I kind of like what Fourth Edition did with making Fey a like indicator of where they came from as opposed to what they
Yeah.
are. Um, I feel like it wasn't. It could have been applied better in Fourth Edition, but I definitely like the type being where this thing originates from.
Mm-hmm.
Because it would definitely make my life easier if I could just slap the Fey, like, origin type on a monster and say, okay, this is my fairy dragon, but you can
Mm-hmm.
tell it's Fey because it has the Fey subtype. Um, I'm I really like fairy dragons too.
Yeah. I mean, fairy dragons are always fun.
I'm
Um.
actually going to be working on a fairy dragon supplement
Ooh.
later today.
Nice.
You're working on so many projects that you've
They
alluded to
just
in this
announced
hour.
they just announced Fizzban, and I'm working with arguably one of the best speculative biology artists like that I have ever encountered, and she is just super excited to do this too. And I'm like, we can make new kinds of fairy dragons, and they can look dope. Have you guys seen?
Mhm.
Do you know the artist Iguano Funk? Not Iguano Mouth,
No.
Iguano Funk.
No.
I can send y'all links to her stuff at some point. Look her up. She's on Tumblr. She's also goes by Iguanodont, like the dinosaur. She's
Okay.
making. She does a lot of like xenobiology stuff, but she actually is writing or creating like a setting of like bird, bug, animal people, or not
Mhm.
animal people, but like an alien race of people that are very bird and bug like. Definitely
Okay.
look her stuff up because it's
Nice.
fantastic. But I'm sorry, I got us off topic.
So I think the only I think so I will add a little asterisk to the fact that fey creatures need to be magic, because you can think about like some elements of the fey creatures. They're some creatures and denizens of the fey. They're not all inherently magical. Like they have some element of magic, right? Because this is Dungeons and Dragons.
Element of magic. It's
Right.
how they relate to magic.
Right, it's how they connect with magic. It's really kind of, I think, the best way to word it, because because when you think about the Fae, it's surreal, it's otherworldly. Well, okay, but and because of that, and I think back to like how 4E kind of brought back that notion of like how, because the Feywild is a reflection of the real world, of the material plane, that it is infused with magic, but it's abundant and it's chaotic. Because that was one of the other attributes of the Feywild in 4th edition, was that the Feywild's chaos is creativity. It is chaos incarnate, and because of that, which is how I also interpreted it in my supplement as well. Because it's chaotic and it's just so much infused with magic, like it's how you connect with magic, how do you relate to magic, and because like if I go back to like the Artificer story, it's like, well, it's more about like how their connection with magic is about their metallurgy, how they do their smithing. That is their magic, and the thing is like, well, what about all the tools that are animated and everything? It's like those are just manifestations of the magic, but they're not of how the artificer relates to the magic. It's just a manifestation of it, and so that's how you want to look at it. It's like, how does your creature connect with magic? And if you think back also to like how night hags don't even live in the Feywild. They technically don't. They actually exist primarily in the plane of Hades. So
it's crazy.
So, but the thing is, they have this element to them where it's all about how they relate to magic and how they connect with magic, because they are of a type of hag that they don't primarily come from the Feywild, but they do this element about carrying souls of the wicked and bringing them to Hades and doing stuff like that.
Dreams,
Stealing
the
dreams.
whole dream thing, yeah.
And then having also this awesome concept of like a night market in the middle of like a town where they're trying to sell things for us, but for the exchange of your soul. So fun stuff like that.
I have a little bit of headcanon about night markets. In my headcanon, goblins are the race that won the responsibility of commerce for the Feywild. So all Feywild markets have to have a goblin involved in some capacity, which is like the sort of goblin claim to fame. And I'm gonna make a whole like goblin market as like a sort of mini adventure in of itself. Super excited about that. But to go back on the subject of not every Fey creature has to be magical, but does have to relate to magic. Let's take one of the most popular Fey creatures out there, the red cap.
Yeah,
the
one
red
of my
cap.
Favorites.
Yeah, it's a contrast. It's a what's the word I'm looking for? Not oxymoron. Contradiction. There.
Contradiction.
It is a contradiction in so many capacities. It is a Fey that loves iron, and iron is supposed to be a metal that Fey aren't a big fan of. It has absolutely no magical abilities. Its abilities are, it has a big sickle and it has big boots, and they're made for walking, and they're gonna walk all over you, honey. And like none of that is in of itself magical, but like there's a long history of like the idea that iron is somehow anti-magical, as if it's like a thing that prevents magic. And if you look into the whole symbology of iron, it makes sense. Iron is the thing that creates technology. Iron is the thing in our head that gives us the ability to think logically. All these sorts of things are related to iron. So the fact that the red cap is so intrinsically related to iron, both in the terms of its actual weaponry and in terms of its blood theming, it makes sense that it wouldn't have any sort of innate magic in of itself. So like in that way it relates to magic. And then of course the fact that it is quite literally born out of bloodshed, that whole origin of its life, pure magic. Like it doesn't have to have magic itself, but there has to be some capacity in which it either whether it be extra stat block wise or within a stat block, relates to magic in some capacity.
Yeah, drop the die in the chat also brings up quicklings as a
Yeah,
similar example.
Very good point. Drop the die. And like their lives are lived by magic, and their lives are shortened by magic, or compressed, I guess.
Gosh, well, first I want to say that I'm 100% here for Ferengi goblins.
Yeah.
Oh no,
Commerce
yeah.
goblins, so fun.
I have a whole...
Ferengis are the best sci-fi adaptations of Fey goblins ever.
The Ferengi are going to be a huge influence on the goblin markets. Did you guys ever... You've seen the Mercane, right?
I have.
The Mercane. They were introduced in 2nd edition as the Arcane. They were primarily spell jamming, but then they were brought into Planescape as like... They're basically tall blue Ferengi that deal in magic items. I'm making the Mercane a particular variety of goblinoid that is also ascended into Feydom and is just all about the magic. It's going to be a lot of fun.
That's very fun. It just fits with goblins for some reason.
It does.
Yeah.
Also, I'm going to be adapting the Henga Yokai from 2nd and 3rd edition. Yeah, but I'm not going to make them able to turn into carp or sparrows because that's kind of not anything that I would call like a Henga Yokai could do. Like, I'm just narrowing it down to Mujina, Kitsune, Itachi, and Tanuki.
Yep. Okay.
But you could be any kind of fox if you want. You could be a jackal if you wanted.
So we are nearing 12 Pacific, which is when D&D Live starts. So y'all get to hear hopefully a little bit more about the Feywild book that Wizards of the Coast will be launching this fall. But I want to bundle in my last question here with our outros. So we'll go in backwards order. So we'll start with Ned. Basically introduce yourself again. If there's anything you want to plug, feel free to do that. But also give a piece of advice you would give to anyone who's watching this now or on YouTube later who is interested in creating for this setting that you didn't touch on before. Ned.
Yeah, honestly, there's not a whole lot that we didn't touch on yet. My advice would be precise. Determine what it is that you want this Fae to do. Determine the aesthetic that you want that Fae to have. Really, once you find the aesthetic, go looking on like YouTube for cool music aesthetics. Go look on Google for cool art. Go onto ArtStation or DeviantArt or Tumblr or anything. Collect as much aesthetic reference material as you can, and then you can figure out, okay, this is how I want this thing to go. Once you have a working library of aesthetic references, the amount of stuff that you can do is basically limitless. And as far as plugs go, I write Feywild content primarily with my group, the Wild Court. I write some other stuff too, but it's really focused on Feywild. And the thing I want to promote most is actually one of my oldest supplements, the Lords and Ladies supplement. It is just a few hundred sales away from reaching Mithril status. Ooh, and if I can get it up into Mithril, that'll be a little life dream achieved for me.
All right, everyone, go pick up Lords and Ladies.
There's a very good chance it'll be updated. In fact, I'm actually working on an update for it right now to trim out some of the misspells and really update the layout. So if you buy it now, you're going to get an updated version of it within the next month or so.
Awesome. If you're watching this on YouTube, there's going to be a link in the description directly to that product. And what about you, Jacky?
All right. Yeah. Hi, everybody. I've been Jacky, and you can always find me on Twitter at DeathByMage, and you can always find all the wonderful games that I create. I am a freelance TTRPG writer, designer, and editor, and I'm also the creative lead for Unbreakable Publishers. You can follow us on Twitter at Unbreakable_pub, and we are about to soon release Unbreakable Revolution, which is our TTRPG anthology series, anthology, which we're going to have a lot of new Asian stories featuring talking about overthrowing tyrants, resisting oppression, and overthrowing colonizers. So we're definitely going to have. We're gonna have if you haven't seen the sneak peek cover, it's on our Twitter. So if you want to check that out, it is awesome. We will probably we're getting ready for the print soon, or at least the print proof. So please keep an eye out for that when we start tweeting about when its release date. And for my advice to anyone when you're for this is look at your favorite piece of media. I don't care what genre you think it is, it will fit the Feywild. Trust me, it will fit. Look at any piece of media that you truly love, that you know very well, like the themes, why characters do the things they do, why even the antagonists do the things they do. Think about it, something you really enjoy and really know well, and think about what it's trying to tell. What's the message it's trying to give in this media, whether it be book, TV show, or movie, or audio drama, whatever. Just whatever works for you. Find it. Take those, break it down, deconstruct it, break it down to its core elements of like what is this trying to tell me? What is the message here? And then apply that to the core of your Feywild adventure. That will be and you can sprinkle that throughout the whole thing, and you can reinforce it through the encounters, through the social encounters, through the exploration and the themes and the aesthetics, because that will also telegraph to you what aesthetics you need to look for. So that's a great place to start, and it's a great place to even build from.
Yes, great advice. And I am Lysa Penrose. I'm the brand manager over at Dungeon Masters Guild. You can follow Dungeon Masters Guild at DMs_Guild over on Twitter and Instagram, or just head to DMsGuild.com to browse some awesome Feywild content. There is a ton of it on Dungeon Masters Guild. A lot of our creators are very passionate about this particular setting. And I will add some advice too. So if this is both your first creation, especially, or your first creation for the Feywild, I recommend just do it, and it'll make it easier for you to finish your project and get the courage to press that publish button if you keep your scope tight. So I recommend an encounter with some Feywild, maybe even using just your favorite Feywild creatures in D&D 5th edition already, or updating creatures from past editions. Or if you're less of an adventure writer, more of like a crunchy writer, create some really compelling Fey using the advice that Jacky and Ned shared. Maybe do a supplement of like 5 fave creatures you made. That would be really great. And I bet folks would love to pick that up. Every Dungeon Master wants a few more tools in their toolbox, right? So that is my advice. This was such a fun community jam. I wish we had like a million more hours to talk about Fae, because you are both clearly very passionate but also knowledgeable about this particular setting and its creatures.
You guys want to do tea time sometime? Y'all want to do coffee?
I mean, I did write a game about drinking tea. What else is new?
Come on, Bubba, let's get some coffee later.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
For folks who are watching this live, head over to twitch.tv/DND. In just a minute, D&D Live is going to be kicking off, and it's 2 days of awesome content about all the new things coming to Dungeons & Dragons. Super exciting. Thank you, everybody who hung out with us in the live chat and who is watching this on YouTube later. We will see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.